Welcome to the Convince God Moves podcast, where stories of struggle are met with hope. My name is Audra, and it is an absolute privilege to share with you these amazing people. Pat is going to share today about being an orphan, and I just learned after interviewing her and heading into my car that she didn't speak of being an orphan to people outside of her immediate family until she was on a mission trip in Romania. At this time, Pat is already a grandma. And in Romania, they visited an orphanage, and Pat just began to share with the kids that she had been an orphan and she had been adopted. Pat's niece, who was right beside her, was floored. She could not believe she had never known this about her aunt. There has been so much healing in Pat's life that we get to hear these stories. You're going to love seeing things God has done in Pat, from an orphanage to her great big farm. Enjoy. Okay, Pat, you have had a pretty wild couple months.
We went to climb a little hill at midnight to watch the fireworks. I just took more or less one step toward the climb to go up the little hill, slipped on the ice, and just the foot folded and the leg broke. Surgery and plate and screws and such.
You have had 2 long months.
In a chair. Ugh.
Ugh, ugh. So that's why I'm here today.
Yeah.
I want to catch you before
I take
you
off.
are free, because you are quite the gardener.
Yeah.
And it's spring.
My fingers are itching. I just can't wait to get those seeds in the ground. My peas and my onions need to be in there now. And they've been waiting on me.
So let's dig right into your story about being adopted.
Well, it is a long story, but to preface it, I'd just like to begin with saying there's a lot of sad parts in the beginning. I'm sitting here as a 73-year-old grandma of 12. Wow. And mother of 3 wonderful children. And I have been married 54 years to just the most wonderful man who was part of the redemption. And that's the really key part of the story, is God as a redeemer, and my life as an adopted little kid is a life of redemption. So having said that, my first memories were in an orphanage. I was in a crib, looking out through the bars of the crib, wishing I could be up and out of that place to play. So that's my first memories. I was born in Minnesota, and somehow, I don't know the story, but I made it to the Seattle area, to a children's home in Medina, Washington. I tease that I was probably a neighbor of Bill Gates.
Yeah, that's an expensive area.
Yeah, he lives there from what I hear. So there still is a children's home, the one I stayed at to this day. I haven't been there, but my son did a little bit of sleuthing to see if he could find out some information. Back in those days, I was adopted at 5 years old from that orphanage. It was a closed adoption, so no information was given about anything, about your past, your medical history, anything. I do want to mention one notable thing. When I was probably around 4 or so, I was still in the orphanage, and I was playing under a table. And that table was a kind of the chrome-sided tables that you think of in the 50s with the chrome chairs. But I was underneath there like it was a little house, kind of playing under there, and the table got knocked over, and it hit my forehead, and I got a pretty good gash according to what they determined, and they took me in for stitches. And that was, very painful, very scary. But when we got to the hospital, there was a very kind nurse that she came over and she took my hand and she said, "You're going to be okay." And all of the things that you might say. But the point was, as I said, I'm 73, and I could remember that time like it was just yesterday. The kindness and the love and the care and the assurance and what it meant to me. I like to tell that story because we all have that opportunity. We have that within us to, even if you don't know what to say, just to hold somebody's hand and show that kind of love in your countenance and such. And I just squeezed her hand. I remember that because they put in the stitches. It must have been an intern or something, and the doctor wasn't satisfied, so they took them out.
Oh.
And then they did it again. And so I got, a fairly decent scar from that. So I've always worn bangs. And yet it's a good memory, actually. It was really meant so much. The other thing from the orphanage I remember is we were let out to play. We would get a coat, whatever coat was in a cardboard box by the door, because we didn't have our own things. We shared. And I went to like a cyclone kind of a fence, and I would hold on to the fence and I would just look around for mommies and daddies. And I would just in my mind pick out the one that I would like to have someday. I don't remember playing out there with the other kids. I just remember I just made a beeline to go out there. In those days, they put pictures of kids that were available for adoption. And I think I was in the Seattle PI or Times, one of those. And my parents saw my picture, my adoptive parents. And so they couldn't have, they had miscarriages. And so they were going to try adoption. So at around 5 years old, I came home with them. And very exciting time. And one of the big deals was they had a dog. So that's a very special thing in my life. And it was great. I remember some good things. It was, especially my dad was very kind of caught up in having a little girl. And so my mom fairly quickly got pregnant, like it happens so often. And this time she brought that baby to full term. And so I had a sister, and then quickly thereafter a brother. I believe that my mother told me, adoptive mother said that she was sent away to a boarding school. And so I think she had a lot of trauma in her life. Unfortunately, once she had these two babies, I felt a shift, and I didn't understand it because I'm a child, but I knew something had changed. And so it was really pretty rough growing up. I spent many a night feeling alone again, like I had prior to being adopted. I would cry many times, and it happened one night that as I was crying myself to sleep, I heard my name. There was no one in the room, but I heard my name spoken very, very tenderly, very, lovingly. And it was just Pat. That's all I heard. And I stopped, and I tried to, no breathing. If I could have stopped my pounding heart, I would have. And I listened, hoping to hear it again, and I didn't, and there was no one there. So that happened actually several times when I was in the kind of the deepest sorrow or grief or whatever. And I now know that was God. He was saying, "You're not alone." How do you say that to a little one? You speak their name. And referencing the story that I just told, we sang a song in church. It's called "He Knows My Name." Powerful for me, because I really believe that. And when we need him the most, he's always there. He's always there anytime. But he knows our names. And for me, when I was little and needed it, he spoke my name. So in those days, I was so excited about school. And I was tried to be a really good student because I wanted to be accepted. And so I was always at the top of my class. And then I got into Campfire Girls. I had a wonderful leader that took us from second grade to 12th grade.
Wow.
And we stayed together the whole time.
Wow.
And we took some ribbing as we got into our teenage years. We had a goal to go to Disneyland, it was not as common as it is today. And I graduated in 1969, and we that year, on our spring break, senior year, we took off and drove to California and saw our first palm trees and went to Disneyland, got glorious tans, and came back, all of us girls, and it was fun. But my leader, she was another bulwark in my life, Mrs. Fanning. And I watched her, and I watched how she interacted with her kids. And I thought, she's an amazing mom, I could see. And that's what an amazing mom does. Mm. And so I would just make these notes, and I think tucked them in my heart. When I get to be old enough and have my own family, that's the kind of mom I want to be. And I got to tell her, she's in her late 80s now. And just a few years ago, we took a drive in the area. We just happened to be up there. And I said, let's go see if she's still at her home. And one thing led to another, and we got to visit with her. And I got to tell her how much she meant to me. And she got to tell me how she saw what I was up against. And she prayed for me during that time when I was in school and doing really well, and with the schoolwork and such, and having some really awesome times with Campfire. I was 15 years old, and I found a letter. It said my last will and testament, and it was written by my adoptive mom. And the envelope was open. It wasn't closed. And so I was curious. So I just opened it up. It read that this is my last will and testament. All of my earthly possessions will go to my 2 children. And she named them. And nothing will go to Pat because she's never been a part of this family. Oh, no. And so that just seared itself into my heart. There it was in black and white. I had known it for some years just by the way things were in our home life, but here it was. And so I knew without a shadow of a doubt I was an orphan again. And then I graduated high school, 840 in our class, and I graduated number 1.
Wow.
And
you were striving.
I was trying so hard. And I was 17 when I graduated, and my parents said it was about that time that they told me that they had done their duty. I was to get a job and move out.
So hang on, did they say anything like, Pat, we are proud of you?
No, that wasn't the kind of relationship we had. It was a very strict upbringing, and those were back in the days when children were to be seen and not heard, if you've ever heard that expression. Yeah. It's kind of crazy that people actually said that. I was able to get a scholarship from the Rotary Club, and it was for 1 year of tuition and books at the University of Washington. So that was helpful. And I got a job. My best girlfriend, her mom worked in Seattle, and she found me a job at the Seattle Credit Bureau, where companies would phone in to check on your credit report, and we would go to actual files, paper, like a
The old days.
yeah, it's crazy. I'm that old. And I did that after my classes, and I took a bus to Capitol Hill where I had a little studio apartment, and so that's how I started. But back to the scholarship, that paid for my tuition and books was $350 for a year at the University of Washington.
Wow.
I know. And I met this really awesome guy in my Scandinavian lit class named Scott. And so about 3 months later, we were engaged. But I said, we're going to wait because I need to know you better. And so we waited for a year until we got married. But I did have a wonderful auntie that I want to mention along the way that helped me in just another picture of a mom I really admired and her lifestyle. And this was my Aunt Lily that lived in Snohomish. And she had a little farm on 5 acres with milk cows and big garden, lots of dahlias, apple trees, and just an amazing place and a small farmhouse. Best food I've ever eaten. Cinnamon rolls hot out of the cook stove, were sticky and gooey, and we're sitting on the kitchen table by the back door. And as kids, we would run by, snatch a cinnamon roll, and out the door. And I think she planned it that way. It was
So how
wonderful.
often did you get to see her?
It wasn't often enough. It would be maybe once a year or so.
Okay, yeah.
And nobody left Aunt Lily's house, whether it was a stranger or a family member, without something. As a little kid, probably not much more than 7 or 8, I said, this is what I want to do. This is who I want to be.
So fast forward, how old were you when you got your first farm? Was this your first farm here?
This is it. When I was 29, I was looking in a paper. We already have 3 little kids, and it was 1980 that we got this 5-acre farm. And our first farm animal was a little goat named Blackberry because we had a whole pile of blackberries out there. But we went from there and added the cows and you name it. We've just what Aunt Lily used to do.
And you share your barn.
Yeah, that started in 2019 when it was pretty tumultuous what was going on with America and politics and such. And I felt very anxious, and God just spoke to my heart to turn that barn into a people space. So I said to Scott, let's get some friends together and let's pray. And since that time, it's always open Wednesdays from 6:30 to 8:30, and everybody is welcome to come, and we just seek the Lord. And the main thing I learned from that is I had my focus on the wrong things. And I was looking at the problems, and they were big. What can one person do? And one person can pray. We're so excited for it. We look forward to Wednesday night. And those friends have become really precious. And we know any one of those people would help anyone else in the group if there was a need. I love preparing, the gardens. And I feel like when I'm out there, it's together time, me and the Lord. I have that time to listen, and I know his voice, and he still talks today. Also, just sharing my admiration for what he has done. I mean, the plants and the trees and the nature and all, it's just stunning.
Okay, so my big question now, what happened in the early years with Scott, and your navigating your life in regard to your adoptive parents? Did you talk to them?
I didn't talk to them very much at first, and I was pretty wounded. And I went from living in a small town to Seattle and riding the bus after work at, from between 11 to midnight. Come to find out later when I met Scott, he said, "What are you doing living here?" As Scott became more part of the picture. We were getting to know each other in those long talks like you do. He heard my story and he believed me, but he couldn't believe quite the story of the parents and how could parents do that.
Yeah.
So he wanted it to be better, and he wanted to be part of the solution. So he would haul me over to my
Wow.
parents' house. It was still the same, and I would leave and cry all the way home. And so we did that several times until he just couldn't stand it anymore, and we kind of cut that off. There was redemption, and I do want to say that. My father passed away first. I was there with him. She wanted to fix up the house for the funeral. My dad had lots of brothers and sisters. And so she figured people would come. I reached out to her and I said, is there anything I can do? And she said, maybe you could come help clean the house. I was not a Christian at that point, but I knew prior to going up to help her clean the house, I had done some thinking about, I had to find forgiveness.
Yeah.
And I didn't know how to do it because I tried on my own steam, and it wasn't, it just, the memories and the hurt would just overwhelm the ability to forgive. But I purposed to do that. So the day came to go up and help clean the house, and it needed it. And she was rummaging around in a cupboard, and she found this old English furniture polish, and she thought that I could maybe use that. And she took it out, and it slipped out of her hands, and it fell on the floor. She was barefoot. The glass just cracked. It just was shards everywhere, and this dark brown polish. I went over and I said, "Don't move. I'll take care of this." And I got a rag and I started picking up the glass and getting it so she wouldn't cut her feet, because she couldn't go anywhere. She was just standing in this pile of, and it just spread out everywhere. And so I'm on my hands and knees and I'm cleaning all this up, and then I start cleaning her feet so she doesn't traipse this dark polish all over the house. And as I'm washing my mother's feet, God infused true forgiveness. And I knew at that point that it was broken. This kind of, there was an element in my life that was, I knew I had to get rid of, and or else I would become bitter as she was bitter herself. And it just broke. I didn't understand how it happened, but when I look back on it now, it was just the act of serving and literally washing my mother's feet, and that healing can come when we do that. And when we've purposed in our hearts and we can't do a thing, when we give it to the Lord and ask for help, He comes and He helps us, and in His time. So that was a very key time. We had some difficulties in our early marriage. We were married about 7 years when it kind of came to a head. I thought, my husband is traveling. He's gone all the time. I have 3 little kids, and it's not working well. And we were trying to do this on our own, and lots of conflict and such. So I was sitting in my car over at a little restaurant, which now sells donuts. It was a taco place at that time. And I sat there and I said, God, I don't know if you're real, but I have had the steering wheel of my own life. I've been calling the shots, and I have made a mess of it. I'm not happy. I don't know where to go. I don't know what to do. I don't want to be a single mother with 3 kids. If you're there, I want to give you the steering wheel. I want to give you the control. As I was sitting there, I understood that everything had just changed. I didn't know how, I didn't know what had changed, but there was a sense that it had just all changed. And it wasn't like joy or like, whoa, this is great. It was just, nope, there's a fundamental shift. The circumstances were all the same, but something was different. And so I drove away and I talked with my husband later on, and I shared what I had done in the car. He and I went and we had a talk. He was raised in the Catholic faith, and they were taught very strictly that divorce was never an option. And I was certainly contemplating that because I was very unhappy and upset. He says, no, we're not doing that. But he said, I think we should go to church or something, because we better find a place where we can go together.
Good.
I wasn't comfortable going to the Catholic Church, so we better find somewhere where we can go. And just coincidentally,
Just so happens.
yeah,
Love those.
his youngest sister gave us a phone call and said, we just found this awesome church, and it's so amazing. You just got to come. You just got to experience this.
Yeah.
And we were invited to the Church of Living Water in Olympia. We went there for the first time. They were raising their hands when they were singing songs, and what? That was very strange.
Yeah.
I mean, because I wasn't used to church at all, let alone what's that about? And then we were asked to turn around and kneel at our chairs and pray, and okay. And so I'm peeking around while everybody's praying, and wow, everybody's so all in. I mean, this is kind of incredible. I don't get this,
Yeah.
but everybody's so sincere. I thought, I want to know more about this. And then I don't know if it was that Sunday or one very quickly thereafter, somebody gave a tongues and an interpretation, and that also was extremely weird to us. We didn't know about that. And the pastor Cliff, he gave the explanation of what this was. He read the scriptures. We had an understanding, and once again I thought, I got to know more about all of this. I got to. He's so wise, and he always speaks about things that are going on in our lives too, and he always has the wisdom about that. And he was about our same age, and I thought, how do you get to be like that? Obviously we know now what I didn't then, and that is because he was in the Word and in prayer.
And I'm wondering, when you had your babies and you were able to love them like they deserved.
Yeah. Having my children, oh my goodness, I never knew what love was. And there it was, right there in my arms. My experience with my kids was so redemptive, because as I raised my 3 kids, so they were all 2 years apart, 2 boys and a girl, it was like God was giving me my childhood back. And you say, how could that happen? That's impossible, but it isn't. All of the things that I would have liked, that's what I lavished on my kids. Like I said, when it's so important when your kids come in the room for your eyes to light up. That never happened when I was growing up. It was like, I remember one time got back from a camp, a Girl Scout summer camp. I had earned the money to go and very excited. It was a wonderful time. I got home and she says, "Oh, you're home," my adoptive mom. It was so nice when you were gone.
Oh my
And like, it just like
sucker punch.
Sucker
you
punch.
Walk through the door.
Right. That was my greeting. Raising those kids was a privilege and a joy and a redemption for me, and the fun. And I was enjoying my children enjoying the things they did. And I mean, I can tell this story and be a little removed from it, even though I have tears of gratitude. I light up when my family comes in the room. I mean, I literally, it just brings me joy. You don't learn until you really get to know Christ that there is unconditional love. I mean, if you've had it in your family, that's amazing. But I didn't learn until later. So I thought I had to work and achieve and be good enough. The character I was born with, I would love to have known my roots, because I think some of that stuff, God just, He makes us in fearfully and wonderfully made. And my personality has always been all in. And I'm so glad for that, but I think it's also what God wants for us when we are seeking Him.